EFI. I get a lot of questions about it, and a lot of people send me global folders, and I wind up just doing it for them. So I figured probably be easier to just show you how to do it. So if you have just downloaded Holley EFI software or not very familiar with it, when you open up a standard global folder, this will be at the top. Nowhere up here does it show you where to add inputs and outputs. So we need to add the individual configurable folder. So we're going to go to Toolbox. We're going to go to Add Individual Config, and brings up a whole bunch of stuff here. So this is also how you add your boost control setup and your nitrous and traction control, advanced tables, a whole bunch of stuff, transmission control. But for this video, we're going to go over I/O, and then just grab a base config, open. So what it did was it populated this tab right here. So if we click on this tab, it brings up inputs and outputs. So it's pretty self-explanatory about, this number doesn't mean anything here. It's the ECU pin that's defined to that means something. So we're going to jump over to another global folder that I've already got open that's set up to kind of show you some demo stuff. And it's this one. So this is a very sensor-rich car, but these are already all done and configured. And if you look, you type your name in here, the type. We're about to go over this, but just wanted to show you some examples. The ECU pin that it's on, and then this is where you'll configure it. And this is in V5, so it'll also tell you where it's used. So let's go to some new stuff that we do not have configured yet. So I kind of just came up with a bunch of different types of sensors or inputs that I felt as if would be relevant and cover kind of everything. So what you'll do is you'll decide what you want to call it. So let's just call this one the right front shock. This particular car is using GSpot Sensors, which is these. That's this particular car. Quite a few other cars I've done have used the race pack travel sensors. And then with race pack, you have to choose, how long of travel you need. You just pick your part number based off of that. So, but this particular car is GSpot Sensors. And what we'll do is we'll go into the global folder, right front shock. So you're going to hit enable. When you hit enable, it's going to auto-populate to ground. This isn't a ground input. This is a 5-volt input. It's going to prompt that says, you're going to have to configure some parameters. So with the GSpot sensors, it comes with a little bit of a setup instruction. But I'm going to go back here and show you what the setup looks like. So for a GSpot sensor, it's 7.62 inches of sensor maximum. All these are 7.62. These are 0. It's a custom 5-volt. And then the units is in inches. That's what you want it to display. And then the format is 1.23. Then it gives you a scale down here. So down here at the bottom is your voltages. And again, when you buy one of their sensors, it comes with this, not this exact printout, but a minimum voltage, and then a maximum voltage, and then a minimum height, and then a maximum height. So we're going to go and we're going to set this up and click here to configure. So when you click here to configure, this is just the first thing that populates, right? So this is the first of the list of sensors that they have, auto selected for you. So click the drop down arrow and it brings up this huge list of different things. So this particular application is all the way at the bottom, a custom 5-volt. But like we just talked about with the race pack is already done for you, right? So like if you wanted a race pack shock travel 0 to 8 inches, just click it and it's done. So you don't have to configure anything. It's already done for you. same thing if you change it to 0 to 3 inches, same deal, it's already configured for you. But this one is custom 5 volt. And again, we'll plug in just like we did with the other one, inches and the format. Oops. The format will be 1.23, sensor minimum 0, sensor maximum 7.62, and then now notice the scale doesn't make any sense, right? 0 to 3, and then voltages are 0 here, right? So our voltages were 0.13, and the top voltage was 4.90. So that right there is not really, it's already interpolated, but what we would do is we would left click, hold and drag so it highlights all of them, right click, and then hit fill row values. So what that does is it makes a nice linear, from point A to point, or from cell 1 to the last cell. And then the same thing here. Our peak is 7.62, and then this is 0. So we're going to left click, drag all the way across, stop, right click, hit fill row values, and now we have our scaling done for the right front shock sensor. So that's one of the more difficult ones to scale, just because you have to actually manually key some stuff in. So let's look at another one here. Inputs. We're on page 2. So I just labeled this one line pressure 500. It's 500 psi. So we're going to enable it, and then we're going to, it's a 5 volt. So this is like a 500 psi Holley transducer. So this is a 5 volt setup. Hit OK. Configure. And again, we're back to the same screen. This will become redundant here in this video, but I feel like the more you see it, the easier it'll be to grasp. So look around and look at that. Holley 500 psi stainless steel. So something I want to point out here is this right here. So this is offsetting. So when you get all done and you upload this to the computer and you go into your live data view, which is up here. But I'm not plugged into a computer or into a ECU. But when you go in here and there's 0 pressure on the transducer, if it reads say +2 psi, you can offset this with -2. So it'll read 0 when there's no pressure on it. So this is just a quick way to offset the transducer. Some of them, there's a little bit of room for error, but this is where you would set up minimums and maximums and cautions and whatnot. You can also switch warning outputs and PC or LCD display outputs, and you can also set up a timing offset if you want right here. So this is a 500 psi. Let's go back to some more inputs here. Fuel temp. So I just said fuel temp GM, right? So thermistor, configure, and right there, Holley coolant temp sensor. So there's a couple different ones here, but you can also do custom, just like we did for voltage. The calibration table will all be dependent upon what sensor you're using. So Autometer is pretty bad about giving you sensor data. I know if you buy sensors from Hyperactive, they are pretty good about giving you sensor data. And if you call them, they'll give you, the sensor data. So, if you, oh, hang on. Okay, sorry about that. Apparently, when you live in a house with 3 English bulldogs, if a leaf falls on the ground, they lose their mind. So, anyway, like I was saying, if you, depending on where you buy your sensors from or whatever it is, some places will give you sensor data. So it's about how you scale each individual sensor. So again, you would just plug in the resistance that you have versus whatever temperature it is. So that would be for a custom temp sensor. Now we'll do this one again quick. This is 100 psi, so fuel return pressure. It'd be a 5 volt. Okay, configure Holley 100 psi transducer, and then you're done. That's all you have to do. Again, you can offset it here. And okay, so here's one. We'll do this ride height, right? So click 5 volt. Right, so this is a race pack laser ride height sensor. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these things, but I've used a couple of them. These right here, these are pretty cool. They'll tell you basically when the car starts to wheelie, you can program them to do a whole bunch of different stuff, but that's a different video. But anyway, if you've got one of these and you don't know what to do with it, you can go here, ride height, it's 5 volt. Okay, configure. Yeah. No, I clicked something wrong here. Yeah, I did. That's why. 5 volt. There you go. Configure. Scroll down, and we've got race pack laser height. Boom. It's all done for you. So you just, you're done. It's just one of those things you just click and you don't have to mess with. So they've got a ton of stuff in here. So their G meter makes it a lot easier to just use their G meter. Rod height for race pack, their infrared temp sensor. Also, these are really cool. I'm actually going to be making a video on these pretty shortly, but these are amp current draw sensors. They're pretty neat. But anyway, they've got a whole bunch of different stuff here, different map sensors, custom 1 bar. But again, anytime you get into the custom stuff, you need to have the sensor data. So, and then you have to confirm that it's accurate. Okay. So if you've got a custom pressure like this, and say the maximum is 1,000. Well, that's fine. Holley can handle all of that. You just have to key the correct data in. So if you key in, your typical sensors are 0.5 volts at the bottom and 4.5 volts at the top. And then you would left click, highlight them all, right click, fill row values. They're usually really linear. So, I'm not telling you that this is how this should be done, but I'm telling you that the majority of them, are like this. Some of the Chinese eBay special ones, I don't know. It depends on what Yin Yang has decided to set them up as, but just get your sensor data, and then you can do whatever you want here. So again, if this was a custom pressure, this one's a laser ride height, but there we go, we'll fix that. And then another one, front wheel speed. So there's a guy by the name of Robert Eat who does some pretty cool front wheel speed bracketry and whatnot, but he sets these things up for it depends on what how many pulses there are per rotation, but digital speed frequency, and it depends on the sensor that he sends with it. It depends on what sensor you buy, but he'll give you this information. But this is how you would apply that information. You'd go to configure, just click yes till it shuts up, and then decide how you want it to display, right? So we want miles per hour. We've got minimums and we've got maximums, and then here, okay, this stuff's all important. So like for a front wheel, your tire diameter, say a Mustang or something, is 26 inches tall. Pulses per rotation, I think he does the majority of them at 32, which is great resolution. And then there's no gearing. So it's 1.0. And then pulses to average. This is something that you'll play with to get a nice smooth data trace out of it. Don't go real high because otherwise the data trace is kind of useless. If the data is really smooth, it's kind of useless. So, um, but yeah, so then there's a front wheel speed setup, and here's one. We'll do something like real basic, right? So say this is a turn signal input. Um, the way this would work is if you were to turn your turn signal on, it would send maybe, let's say it sends a ground. Okay, so that means that when you turn your left turn signal on, it's sending a ground signal to the ECU. You could do some really cool stuff with Holley with turn signals and four ways and flash to pass, a whole bunch of cool stuff. But say this turn signal is going to be sending a ground. Well, it doesn't matter what the left turn signal is, telling the ECU. It matters what the ECU is going to tell the bulb to do. So we'll go to outputs. So here's some outputs, right? These are, I just threw these together, but let's look at the left turn signal, right? So what do we want it to output? Do we want it to output a ground? So it came in as a ground, but maybe we want to output 12 volt because all of our relay board is set up for 12 volt input. So we can choose ground here, and then we can configure it. So the switched input trigger would be turn signal left is enabled. Okay, so when this turn signal left is enabled, it will activate the output. We can set up linked outputs, but here's timer. So this is how you would do a turn signal, right? So active time of say 3/4 of a second, right? We want it to repeat, and then an inactive time of half a second. So there's ding, 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 ding. The annoying flasher you got it built right into the Holley. So again, input triggers, linked outputs. You can link another output to it. So if you wanted to do whatever right turn signal based off of a hazard or a four way, you could do that. And then same thing here with turn signal right, you would repeat doing the same thing. And now for the inputs, foot brake. This one could be used as a rev limiter. So I see this one pretty commonly. We'll just call it a 12 volt input, right? 12 volt foot brake. So that means when you step on the brake, it's going to probably turn your brake lights on, but it's also going to send a 12 volt signal. We're assuming that you know what you're doing when you wire the car and you didn't screw anything up, but we're going to send 12 volt, nice clean 12 volt to the ECU. So it's simple as that. That's all you got to do is enable it for a 12 volt or for a ground. But this stuff has to be set up in order for it to work. Don't expect this stuff to work if you didn't tell it what it is. So the way I do this is once I have this all set up like this, okay, it's all configured. I go over here into the pin map, okay. So now you're going to see that we've got all of these different sensors sitting up here. All these different inputs, they're all sitting up here. They're doing nothing. They're unassigned inputs. So we need to pick where they're going to go. So I actually, when I wire a car, I wire a bunch of cars, but when I wire a car, this is the first thing that I do when it gets to the EFI wiring part of it. So the reason being is that you can kind of map out how you're going to terminate everything at the ECU. So if you map this stuff out first, you'll know if you're going to run yourself into a problem, right? So you'll notice here, like we'll look at ride height, it says 5, which is a 5 volt, okay? This is a Dominator car, and what you would do is you just click and drag this to a certain pin, okay? Now, in the past, I've seen people concern themselves with input numbers, thinking that their input number here has to match the input number used over here. It doesn't. So find yourself a 5, wherever, on whatever connector, and drop it. So front wheel speed, frequency, find yourself an F and drop it. Ground, find yourself a G, dump it. H is 12 volt. Find yourself an H, drop it. And then here's that temp, right? Fuel temp. Find yourself a T, drop it on there. Now you know, don't look at this, but now you know what pin this is, okay? So when you look at the connectors, you know, you got J2A, and then outputs is J2B, right? And then you got J3 and you got J4. So when you go to wire the car, you've got an idea of, oh, okay, well I need to populate pins at A1, at A19, at A28. And once you do this, you can use this as reference, right? So you can throw the laptop in the car when you're working on it and you're wiring it, you're building your harness, and you can say, okay, well, I need to have, you know, maybe the white with red stripe or something going to A19 because that's what I designated for trans temp. So the last thing I want to show you, you know, I mean, we've got outputs. It works the same way. Same thing. Just click, find yourself an H, and drop it. This one's coil power. Find yourself a G, and drop it. But the last thing I want to show you is when you're wiring up inputs and outputs, and everybody's got a different way of doing it, but what you need to know is this tab right here, View Fixed. So if you look at this, this is all the fixed stuff that's in the ECU that you cannot configure, okay? So this is in your main harness. This is telling you, you know, IAC and fuel pressure input and all the stuff that comes in your main harness. So we'll skip that area. But look at this here. So connector J2. Now notice there's a change in A to B, okay? That's important. Don't think that B, you know, J2B pin 18 is a sensor ground. It's not. So J2A 18 sensor ground. So sensor ground, and then there's a sensor 5 volt output. Then this is connector B, J2B. All right. And then you've got, you know, J3 and J4. So you have access to quite a few sensor grounds. If you've got a Dominator, if you have a Dominator, I do not ever use J1. I don't mess with it. I just want that harness to be what runs the engine. All my auxiliary stuff goes here. So hopefully that helped y'all. Hopefully some of you guys understand, you know, inputs and outputs. And if not, I'm sure I'll still get plenty of messages. Thanks, guys.